This is Jack, and this video is if you want more peace in your life, do this. Thanks for being here. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Now, I'm going to give you 3 steps, 3 ways of approaching this question. And I'm going to get right into it. So the first one, the first way of having more peace in your life is to understand the serenity prayer. And you've probably come across this, right? This is a prayer that talks about having the courage to take action where you can and the serenity to let go when you can't, and the wisdom to know the difference. So at a super big picture level of your life, right, there's things that you can shift and take action on, and there's things that you can't, that really it's about a journey of acceptance. And if you had the wisdom to know the difference, like, oh, I'm being called to take action or I'm being called to let go and accept, probably your life would be a lot easier because you're no longer in resistance, you're no longer in doubt, you're no longer in panic. It's just do if you can, or don't do if you can't. And you might say, well, I'm thinking about whether to change jobs or career paths, and there's a lot that goes into those decisions. There's geography, there's the impact on my family or partner, there's money, there's the certainty versus the uncertainty of perhaps a new path or going self-employed or whatever it is. And I get it. A lot of modern day life issues have a certain complexity to them. I do want to challenge you though, particularly if you're someone who's smart and you're good at handling complexity and looking at things from different perspectives, sometimes there's a simplicity that can really serve us. And to get down to the simplicity of, do I take action or do I let go? It can sometimes really serve us. I used to play a lot of football, soccer as a kid. I was pretty good at it. And I remember one day someone explained to me, it's like, when you get the ball, there's only really 3 things you can do. You can stop, you can move with the ball, or you can pass it or shoot. And I remember thinking about that. I'm like, wow, I played this game for years. I loved it. I watched it. I played at lots of different levels, school, university, county, and no one had ever just broken it down that simply. And so in your own life, if there's something that you're struggling with and you're struggling to find peace, just noticing, hey, gut feel, intuition, do I need to step into action or do I actually need to let go? That simplicity can sometimes serve you. Okay, the second way that you might be able to invite more peace into your life is to relax your self-concept. Now that might sound like some big fancy phrase, or you may not have come across this before, but there's a certain point in your development where what life might be calling you to is actually to relax the ideas that you have about yourself, to relax your self-identity, your self-concept, your self-image. And we will probably talk more in other videos about the how of doing that, but if you could really just get in touch with in this moment that anytime you are in an identity that makes it hard for you to be with your present moment experience, right? So if you identify as an optimistic person and today you're feeling down, right? Or maybe you identify as a deep person, but what's in front of you today is a whole load of super tactical, pragmatic, practical stuff, and you're kind of struggling to get engaged with it. What you might notice in these instances is the self-concept, the who I take myself to be, is actually slightly in resistance to reality of what is here. So part of dropping your self-concept is actually expanding its range, that you no longer define yourself narrowly, like I'm a this person, I'm a that person. And you might say, well, oh, that's cool, Jack, but I kind of know I'm a this person, right? I know I'm a liberal, or I know I'm an optimist, or I'm a say it as it is person, right? You might be a realist. And my invitation is if those things are true about you, just trust that they're true. You don't need to build an identity around them, right? If you're good at playing the violin, you don't need to build an identity that you walk in the world like, I'm really good at the violin. Just when you pick it up, you'll know and we'll know. And there can be a similar thing that if you only know yourself as a realistic person, it can be hard for you to take on visionary ideas that actually might be important to your individual or our collective development. If you're a liberal, it might be really hard for you to get in touch with conservative ideas. And if you build too much of an identity about it, the identity is actually getting in the way of seeing the value in someone else's argument, right? So can you start to see how you create friction and resistance in your life when your self-identity rubs up against either something you're experiencing, right? Like you might be experiencing emotion, maybe experiencing pessimism, but your identity is I'm an optimistic person, and it's hard for you to be in touch with that, right? Or your identity is I'm a liberal, so you shut down when anyone talks to you about things that don't sound liberal to you. And I'm not trying to say that one set of ideas is better than another. What I'm trying to say is, how can you cultivate a more frictionless reality, right? When people say life is perfect, right, or reality is perfect, what they mean by that is when you are not in friction with reality, there is a completeness and a suchness to reality. There is there's not a need to change it or make it something different. And I remember kind of studying this and finding it really hard as someone who's always been, a change maker, an entrepreneur, or make a difference kind of person. And people saying, well, reality's perfect. And I'd be like, well, have you looked at sex trafficking recently? Have you looked at how many homeless people we have in our streets? And that would confuse me. And eventually I had to get to the place of change can happen when you're in full acceptance of what is. Right? So if you need to lose weight, or if you need to leave a relationship, or if you need to change career, that's actually easier when you come to acceptance of things as they are. Not acceptance like I'm going to tolerate onwardly into the future things that I know aren't good for me or right for me, but just an acceptance of this moment and the reality as it is. And then once that acceptance happens, for most of us, it's then easier to change because we see what needs to happen, and we're not fighting, we're not suppressing, we're not repressing, we're not defending against reality. We can actually proceed with more presence and purpose. So that's all about how do you relax your self-concept. Tell me your cherished beliefs about yourself, and we will probably find the place that you are losing presence because your identity is fixed and constellated around these ideas, and it can become a bit like a straitjacket. And what we're talking about here is how do you relax that straitjacket so that you can be whatever you need to be in the moment, right? Sometimes you need to be strong. Sometimes you need to be vulnerable. Sometimes you're happy. Sometimes you're actually grieving, and happiness is the furthest thing from your experience, right? So the more flexibility, malleability, and less conceptualized ideas you have about yourself, the easier it is to be yourself, right? So the easier it is to have peace, the easier it is to actually love yourself, because a lot of times the reason that we don't love ourselves is because we love that self-concept, right? So we love ourselves when we're happy, optimistic, peaceful, go-getting, serene, whatever that self-concept that you have is. And when you're not that, guess what? It's hard to love yourself because you're like, hey, that's not part of the picture. That's not part of the program. So you tend to defend against it, suppress it, repress it, dissociate from it. And now you're not really loving yourself because you're split. Does that make sense? So that's the second way that you can experience peace, is by relaxing that self-concept. Now, the third way that you can invite more peace into your life is to actually get a bit closer to the reasons that you want to be peaceful. And to notice if there are ways in which sometimes your desire to be peaceful is at odds with your actual experience. So what I mean by that is, if you're having the experience, I'm a peaceful person, or I'm wanting to be peaceful, or I'm wanting you to be peaceful, but actually what I'm experiencing right now is irritation, or frustration, or restlessness, or perhaps some resentment, or even anger. Now we've got a problem, because your desire to be peaceful might be at the expense of the presencing of what is really going on, right? So I've had this experience, and I can notice this part in myself, that the part of me that really wants to be peaceful and relaxed sometimes has a problem acknowledging that there's another part of me that actually isn't peaceful right now, and it needs to be presenced. It needs to be noticed and acknowledged. And so here's the kind of kicker for this, right? There's a paradox that for you to be more peaceful, what you may have to do is actually get in touch with everything that isn't peaceful about you, so that it can actually be seen, heard, and metabolized, and you might find a truer peace on the other side of that, right? So for people who are supremely peaceful people, sometimes their direction of development is to be more in touch with their anger and their edge. And that can seem counterintuitive, that can seem paradoxical, but it's sort of like, if you imagine you're sweeping something under the carpet, right? And you're like, oh, I feel really peaceful, but actually under the carpet here is a whole set of problems and things I'm not willing to look at. You can see that's a kind of false peace, right? And so we're inviting you to say, hey, even if it's difficult, and even if it takes time, and even if it's uncertain, let's have you look beneath that carpet, perhaps with someone holding your hand, or perhaps with a coach or a therapist or a loved family member, and let's actually see what's there. Let's deal with it. Let's engage, right? Here's the key word here, is engagement. Let's engage fully with your life and with your experience. So you're not having to numb out, you're not having to dissociate, you're not having to repress, you're actually going to be with reality. And once you've fully felt that, you might have to move through some anger. You might have to move through a great deal of anger if this is something that you haven't dealt with in your life. On the other side of that, there's a more real peace, right? There's a more real peace because it's actually not an equilibrium that you're finding in your mind, right? Sometimes people have this kind of fantasy place that they kind of drift to, right? Where everything is good and golden, and maybe they're sailing a boat on a serene lake, or perhaps they're sunbathing and life is just holding them and the sun is beaming down. That's a useful tool when you deploy it consciously to induce a particular state. But at a certain level of development, you may be less in the game of inducing states as actually noticing and presencing the states that you're in. And that's subtle territory, right? Sometimes you do need to kind of move a state, right? If you're about to, engage in some athletics or a performance or a speech, it might be that you want to move your state in a particular way. But if you're mostly having to induce states at the expense of really being with what's here, I think your level of development might be calling you to something new, which is actually how do you be with reality, that you're going to fall in love with reality. You're going to fall in love with what's real, what's here, and what you're present to, rather than some fantasy world or some daydream world that you need to go to in order to feel peaceful and relaxing. That there is a kind of peace that is in the heat of battle, right? There's a kind of peace that comes from the full engagement in your life. And then when you go to sit down and relax, it's not like there's this stack of issues that you haven't dealt with, or this stack of tasks and problems that you never get to because you're procrastinating, right? It's a kind of truer peace. One of the ways that I got into this work in my early days of coaching, I would help people get more organized in their life. I would help them look at their self-management systems, the way that they track things, the way they use their calendar, the way that they deal with email. And I don't do that work now, but what was really useful about that work was it got me to see that sometimes people who are spiritual and who love to meditate, they've got a lot of things in their lives that aren't really together, right? That there's this sort of sense that I need to kind of go somewhere else and meditate because I'm not very able to face my life. And that may not be you, but I'm throwing this out there as a thing. If you're drawn to the more spiritual life, there can be something pretty cool about getting very realistic and pragmatic about your duties, your tasks, the things that you're committed to, your responsibilities, and really cleaning up in orientation to them so that you're in good relationship with them, so that you're on top of them, so that you're in right relationship. You're engaged fully in the things that you need. It's much easier to fully relax your nervous system when you know at the end of your meditation you're not going into some kind of craziness that you keep going into every day because there's a way that you haven't really structured and prioritized your life. So just a little encouragement at the end here that if you want more peace, there may be some things that you have to face in your life that you haven't faced, and that might be difficult, but it's worth it. It's worth being able to be with the things in your life so that when you start to relax, it's not like your mind sort of accurately is drifting to things that really do need your attention. And yes, that's losing presence, but in some ways it's not. It's not losing presence because part of you knows you need to engage more fully in your life in order to experience a truer and deeper peace. That's my wish for you. Thanks for being with me in this video. Please subscribe to the channel. Click the bell so that you get notifications of new videos that come out. Please share this video if it's been useful to you or there's someone you know that might benefit from it. And as always, questions and comments, super welcome beneath the video. I'm Jack. Thanks for being with me.